Welcome back to Avoidant Decoded. If you're new here, this is where we break down the quiet, complicated side of love, attachment, and the way people protect their hearts without even realizing it. Before we dive in, if this channel has helped you understand yourself or someone you love a little better, consider joining our channel membership. It's a small way to support the content and get closer access to what we're building here. Now let's get into today's topic. They don't shut you out because they don't care. They pull back because they're feeling too much, too fast, and haven't figured out how to sit inside that feeling without losing themselves in it. Have you ever loved someone who seemed to retreat the moment things got real? Someone who looked composed, maybe even unreachable, but you could tell something much heavier was churning underneath. When someone with an avoidant style starts falling for you, it almost never looks like closeness right away. More often it looks like tension, distance, a kind of confusion that doesn't make sense on the surface. But if you're willing to look past the silence instead of taking it personally, you start to notice something quietly happening. Love is working against fear, one small moment at a time. For an avoidant person, the journey from emotional guardedness to actual vulnerability doesn't happen overnight. It's gradual, buried under layers of self-protection they've spent years constructing. Distance has always felt like safety to them. Independence became their armor. Somewhere in their past, they learned that getting close to someone could mean disappointment, loss of control, or real emotional pain. So when intimacy finally shows up in their life, their brain doesn't interpret it as comfort. It reads it as danger. And yet, when a genuine connection starts forming, something inside them begins to crack open. They feel torn in two directions at once. Part of them craves closeness, while another part is screaming for space. At first, this internal tug-of-war just feels like chaos to them, like they're unstable or contradictory. Their gut reaction is to retreat back to what's familiar: distance, silence, control. But here's where it gets interesting. When the person they're falling for doesn't push, doesn't panic, and instead responds with patience and calm, steady presence, something starts to give. The walls don't come crashing down, they just loosen, bit by bit. You'll catch it in tiny details. They stay in an uncomfortable conversation, a beat longer than they normally would. Their voice softens slightly when a painful topic comes up. Instead of vanishing when things feel like too much, they pause. None of this looks dramatic from the outside, but for someone like this, it's massive. This change isn't something you can force from the outside. It comes from a battle happening entirely within them. Love starts stirring up emotions they've kept buried for years. The wish to finally be understood, the fear of being abandoned, the need for closeness they were taught to swallow. Their mind starts questioning an assumption they've held onto for a long time, that getting close to someone always ends in pain. That realization feels like a contradiction to them. They want the connection, but they're still terrified of it. So even while the old habits show up, the withdrawal, the sudden quiet, the emotional shutdown, something new is happening beneath all of that. A part of them is choosing to stay, and that alone is proof that things are shifting. As trust slowly grows, they might start letting you see pieces of themselves they usually keep hidden. It won't be smooth or confident. It'll be clumsy, hesitant, uncertain. They might open up about a thought they normally keep to themselves, confess a fear they never talk about, or show emotion without really knowing how to put it into words. For someone who's used to keeping tight control over their feelings, this is uncharted territory. It feels raw and exposed, but every single attempt matters. It's their quiet, imperfect way of saying, "I'm trying to let you in." What might look like inconsistency on the surface is actually deep internal rewiring. They're learning, often in real time, that closeness doesn't have to mean loss, and that being vulnerable doesn't automatically lead to getting hurt. Their body might still react like intimacy is a threat, but something underneath that reaction is starting to push back. When an avoidant person falls in love, you're not going to see big speeches or sweeping romantic gestures. It shows up in the quiet decisions: staying instead of leaving, being honest instead of shutting down, choosing to stay present even when it's uncomfortable. Every one of those moments is a small crack in old patterns they've carried for a long time. None of this is effortless for them. It can feel like an internal war that never fully quiets down. One side pulling toward independence, the other pulling toward connection. But love slowly becomes the thing that interrupts that old programming. Step by step, it teaches them that safety doesn't only exist in solitude, it can exist in closeness too. So when you start noticing those subtle shifts, when someone who used to keep everyone at arm's length begins to soften, understand that it's not random and it's not emotional flakiness. It's a quiet transformation happening underneath the surface. It's someone learning, maybe for the first time, how to love in a way that isn't ruled entirely by fear, a way that leaves room for trust. From the inside, it probably feels like a non-stop push and pull. One part of them wants to open up, to feel close to someone, to actually experience belonging. At the same moment, another part gets overwhelmed and panics, pulling them back toward the safety of distance. It becomes this constant negotiation between what they want and what they've been conditioned to run from, between protecting themselves and letting themselves be fully seen. As feelings deepen, an avoidant person starts to notice something uncomfortable. The very defenses they built to keep themselves safe are the same things standing between them and the connection they secretly want. That's not an easy thing to accept, because it challenges everything they believed about distance equaling safety. Eventually, they start to understand that real strength isn't about staying isolated, it's about being willing to be truly seen and choosing to stay anyway. What makes this shift so powerful is that no one can force it. You can't talk someone into vulnerability or demand that they love differently. It has to come from inside them. In a way, love becomes a mirror, reflecting both their deepest fears and their ability to grow past them. Slowly, how they respond to intimacy starts to change. The fear doesn't disappear. They just start acting despite it. That's the real turning point, not the absence of anxiety, but deciding the connection is worth pushing through that anxiety for. This becomes a quiet rebellion against their own patterns, choosing to stay engaged even when every instinct is telling them to run. It usually doesn't look dramatic. It shows up in small, almost invisible actions, replying instead of going silent, saying they need a little space instead of disappearing entirely, coming back after tension instead of avoiding it altogether. These moments might seem minor to anyone watching, but internally, they're huge. Every time they come back, it becomes more proof to them that closeness doesn't have to end in getting hurt. Over time, love starts acting like both a challenge and a teacher for them. It brings up everything they've buried. Their need for connection, their fear of being rejected, the loneliness they never really admitted to feeling. As they face those emotions, they start to realize that their independence, while it protected them, also kept them emotionally boxed in. The moment they start choosing presence over self-protection, something fundamental shifts. They're no longer just avoiding love. They're learning how to actually hold on to it. This process isn't clean or straightforward. It's slow, messy, and uncomfortable a lot of the time, but it's real change. The gradual dismantling of old patterns, not because someone forced it, but because they finally started choosing something different on their own. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, love rarely announces itself loudly. It doesn't usually come wrapped in constant declarations or big romantic moments. Instead, it shows up quietly through consistency, effort, and a kind of presence that doesn't ask for attention. To really see this kind of love, you have to pay attention to what isn't being said out loud. Their affection tends to live in small, steady actions rather than dramatic displays. They may not say, "I love you," often, but they'll start showing it in grounded, practical ways. They might remember small things about you without ever making a big deal of it. How you take your coffee, the way your mood shifts when something's bothering you, what makes you feel safe. For someone who naturally keeps people at a distance, noticing details like that is actually significant. It means they're letting you into a space they usually guard closely. Their love often comes through in reliability. They show up consistently, helping when it's needed, being there when it counts, staying steady over time. These actions might look small from the outside, but for them, they represent a manageable way to stay close without feeling completely overwhelmed. Instead of chasing intense emotional highs, they lean towards stability. Predictability lets them stay connected without feeling like they're disappearing into the relationship. On the flip side, overly intense or highly emotional moments can actually push them into withdrawal because it feels too exposing, too much to process at once. Over time, they might start weaving you into their daily life in small, quiet ways. It's not accidental, it's intentional, even if it doesn't look obvious. It's a sign that you're becoming part of their emotional world. At the same time, they'll still hold back with words, not because they don't feel anything, but because they feel a lot and struggle to turn those feelings into language. Their silence isn't empty, it's control, protection, and processing happening all at once. So when they do open up, whether it's a memory, a fear, or a private thought, it means something. It's a moment where their guard drops just slightly, where trust starts forming, fragile, but genuine. It's a sign that, little by little, they're starting to believe their emotions won't be used against them. Every small moment of openness is like another layer of the wall around their heart being softened, not torn down completely, just gently worn away through experience. Their love also shows up in contradiction. After a moment of real closeness, they might suddenly seem distant or pull away without warning. From the outside, that can feel confusing, even painful. But in reality, that pulling back is usually just their nervous system trying to find its balance again. Emotional closeness can genuinely overwhelm them, so they step back just long enough to steady themselves. The most important part, though, is what happens next. When an avoidant person is truly falling in love, they don't just vanish into that distance forever. They come back, Even after the silence, even after needing space, they return, and that return matters. It's proof the connection is starting to outweigh the fear. Slowly, their whole emotional rhythm begins to shift, pulling away, then coming back again and again, each time a little easier than the last. Pulling back, then coming close again. And every time it happens, they stay a little longer than the time before. Over time, you'll probably start noticing a quiet kind of protectiveness showing up. Not controlling, not possessive, just thoughtful. They start considering how their actions affect you. They check in more. They put real effort into being consistent with their words and their actions, even when it doesn't come naturally to them. Keeping a promise starts to mean something emotionally significant to them. It represents stability, something they used to keep at arm's length. Through love, they slowly discover that commitment doesn't have to feel like a cage. It can actually feel like trust. If you really want to understand how an avoidant person loves, you need patience and emotional awareness. Their affection almost never announces itself. It doesn't come through constant reassurance or big emotional displays. Instead, it shows up through steadiness, presence, and quiet consistency. Where other people might lean on words to reassure you, they lean on action. Where others chase closeness openly, they show care through reliability. Their love isn't about intensity, it's about showing up in ways that might look small but actually carry real weight over time. And even though how they express love can seem understated, it's usually deeply genuine. Every gesture is intentional. Every bit of effort is a quiet choice to move against their fear instead of letting it run the show. When an avoidant person pulls back, it's tempting to read it as rejection, but what looks like distance from the outside is often the visible tip of something much deeper happening internally. A lot of avoidant people grew up learning that closeness could be unpredictable, overwhelming, or even painful. In response, they built self-reliance as a form of emotional protection. Distance became their way of staying in control, not proof that they're incapable of loving someone. That fear doesn't just vanish once they form a real bond. If anything, it can get stronger. The closer they feel to someone, the more exposed they feel internally, and the stronger the pull to retreat becomes. What looks like emotional indifference is often actually a protective reaction to feeling overwhelmed. It's not an absence of feeling, it's too much feeling happening at once. They're constantly caught between two forces, wanting connection and fearing they'll lose themselves inside it. That's what creates the whole cycle of pulling close, then pulling away. They reach for connection, then retreat when it feels like too much, then feel the loneliness of that distance and come back again. It's not that their feelings are inconsistent, it's that there's real conflict happening within those feelings. As they start caring more deeply for someone, this internal tug-of-war gets even more intense. Love brings both comfort and a sense of threat at the same time. On one hand, they want to be truly known and close to someone. On the other, they're afraid of becoming dependent, losing control, or feeling emotionally consumed. Their system isn't rejecting love itself, it's reacting to what love represents to their sense of safety. That's why they might go quiet after an emotional moment or seem distant right after showing affection. It's not them pulling away from you, it's them recalibrating after feeling emotionally exposed. Here's the hard truth about this pattern. It often hides real attachment underneath it. Even though they think they're protecting themselves by creating distance, they're also cutting themselves off from the very connection they actually want. Underneath the fear, the desire for closeness is still there. It's just that trust feels like giving up control, and giving up control feels dangerous to them. But when they meet someone who doesn't mistake their distance for indifference, someone who understands it as fear rather than disinterest, something starts to shift over time. They begin to realize that closeness doesn't have to erase who they are. It doesn't have to mean losing their identity or their sense of control. That understanding doesn't come fast or easily, though. It builds slowly because their emotional wiring runs deep, and fear isn't something you can logic your way out of. It has to be unlearned through lived experience. It's rooted in the emotional memory of their very first relationships. What actually helps an avoidant person move through this fear is safety. Not pressured or demanded safety, but the kind that's offered steadily over and over, without conditions. When they start to understand that love doesn't require them to be constantly available, that needing space isn't punished, and that distance doesn't automatically mean abandonment, something inside them begins to relax. The urgency behind their need to pull away starts to fade. In its place, something new and unfamiliar starts growing, a quiet willingness to stay present even when it's uncomfortable. Slowly, they come to understand that vulnerability doesn't always end in pain, and that needing someone doesn't erase who they are. This is where the real emotional shift begins. Their fear of intimacy was never really about love itself. It was about expecting to get hurt again, about repeating painful experiences they were never prepared to go through a second time. But when they start experiencing closeness that feels safe enough to stay in, even while they're scared, love begins reshaping them from the inside out. What used to be a wall starts becoming something more like a door. What used to be silence starts turning into cautious trust. And what used to feel like fear slowly transforms into courage. The courage to stay emotionally present, even while parts of them are still unsure. Patience is what allows love to actually reach an avoidant heart. For someone who's spent most of their life stepping back from closeness, patience isn't passive, it's active healing. Avoidant people don't rush trust, not because they can't feel deeply, but because they feel things intensely, sometimes overwhelmingly so. Every step toward real intimacy feels like walking into unfamiliar territory where old wounds still echo. They don't need convincing, they need time. Time to observe, to test whether it's actually safe, and to slowly rewrite what love means to them. They need to learn that love isn't control, isn't chaos, isn't pressure, that it can be steady enough to stick around even when they're uncertain. If someone pulls away the second an avoidant person starts opening up, it only confirms their oldest fear, that closeness always leads to loss eventually. But when patience meets their distance instead of punishment, a completely different story starts to unfold. They begin to realize they aren't abandoned when they struggle, aren't rejected when they need space, and aren't replaced when they're emotionally inconsistent. That doesn't mean ignoring your own needs or putting up with neglect. It means understanding that deep emotional rewiring simply can't be rushed. Healing for an avoidant person isn't a straight line. It moves in cycles. They might open up, then withdraw, connect, then retreat. But progress is still happening within those cycles. Every time they come back, every attempt at honest communication, every moment of openness is proof that something is shifting beneath the surface. Patience is what lets that change settle in. It gives them room to be imperfect without feeling unsafe. And in that room, they slowly start shedding the need for emotional armor. Instead of bracing for loss, they start experiencing continuity. Over time, love stops feeling like a threat and starts becoming something stabilizing. They begin to see that closeness doesn't erase their independence, that they can stay true to themselves while still being emotionally connected, that they don't have to disappear in order to feel safe. This isn't something they learn through explanation. It's something they absorb through consistent experience, through steady behavior, through someone staying emotionally grounded even when they aren't. That kind of consistency slowly reshapes how they see intimacy altogether. In this way, patience becomes a mirror reflecting a new possibility, that love and freedom can actually coexist. And for someone who once believed those two things could never go together, that realization changes everything. They start approaching instead of always retreating. They start expressing instead of always suppressing. And little by little, what once felt dangerous starts feeling like connection. That's the point where love stops being something they're just surviving and starts becoming something they actively participate in. Once you understand an avoidant heart on this level, their distance stops looking like disinterest. You start noticing the effort hidden inside their restraint, the hesitation before they speak, the internal struggle before they choose to stay, the courage it takes for them not to disappear. Their love isn't loud, and it isn't effortless. It's intentional. It's a choice they make again and again, especially in the moments when leaving would be so much easier. What all of this really comes down to is this. When you start noticing an avoidant person becoming a little softer, a little more present, more willing to come back after pulling away, that's not random or confused behavior. It's a real sign that trust is quietly forming inside them. Their emotional world isn't changing in some sudden, dramatic way. It's shifting quietly, through experience, not through words. When an avoidant person chooses to stay, especially after a moment of distance or discomfort, it's worth understanding what that actually means. They're not staying because they feel forced to. They're staying because something inside them is starting to feel genuinely safe within the relationship. For them, that's a huge internal shift. It means their fear no longer has full control. A small, real sense of trust is starting to take root. The core truth here is that avoidant people aren't incapable of love. It's that their fear of emotional closeness makes love feel unsafe to them. So they protect themselves by withdrawing, going quiet, or creating distance when things start to feel too intense. That's not because they don't care. It's because their mind is trying to prevent overwhelm or protect them from getting hurt. But in a relationship built on patience, consistency, and emotional safety, something in them starts to recalibrate. Through real experience, they slowly learn that closeness doesn't always lead to pain, that presence doesn't always come with pressure, and that being vulnerable doesn't automatically mean losing control or losing themselves. This kind of learning doesn't happen fast. It's gradual, and it's rarely a smooth process. They'll move forward, then pull back again. But over time, the urge to run gets weaker, and their capacity to stay gets stronger. Their fear doesn't disappear entirely. It just stops calling all the shots the way it used to. In simple terms, they start unlearning the idea that intimacy equals danger. Instead, they build a new understanding that it's possible to stay emotionally connected while still feeling safe and independent. So when this kind of change happens, it's not about them becoming a completely different person. It's about slowly healing the part of them that learned to associate love with risk. And once that healing starts, love stops being something they automatically run from. It becomes something they can gradually learn to trust, one experience at a time. That's really the whole journey. Love stops being something they avoid and slowly becomes something they trust. What used to feel like a wall starts turning into a doorway. What used to feel like fear starts turning into awareness. And what used to be distance becomes the beginning of real connection. This isn't about changing who they fundamentally are. It's about unlearning what made them afraid to be truly seen. And when that shift finally takes hold, love stops being a threat they run from. It becomes a place they keep choosing to come back to, with a little more courage each time.